but there's no way to know exactly. We also don't know how many people were traveling with them. And it's very unlikely that these wise men traveled alone. They were wealthy. They had an entourage, probably some people, guards for protection, and probably some assistants, and they're wise men, so there's probably students. It was probably a group of some size. And we don't know where they came from other than the east. Now that's pretty non-specific. Right? So somewhere east of Israel, so Persia maybe, or even India, because we know they were traveling for a long time, possibly even China. But again, Matthew doesn't tell us. And magi is non-specific. It really doesn't tell us. It's translated wise men or astrologers, Zoroastrian priests, traveling scholars, something along those lines. One thing we are sure about is they were Gentiles. Now, Matthew does not give us the specifics we might like, and as greedy 21st century people who are used to knowing all the details. Of course, we often get made up details when we listen to 24/7 news. But these were wise men, and they were not Jewish people. So the first folks to come to see the baby Jesus were Jews, the shepherds. The shepherds were Jewish people abiding in the fields. And the second we have recorded were Gentiles. So Matthew was already setting up his ending. Go ye into all the world and make disciples of every nation. The Great Commission, that's the end of Matthew. Well, sometimes the world comes to you. So the wise men come, they check in with Herod, who is the local authority. That's the sort of thing you were supposed to do. And Herod consults with the religious experts as to where the king would be born. What does the prophecy say? And the religious experts say, Bethlehem. It's in the book of the prophet Micah. Well, Herod butters up these wise men and asks them to send word of where they find the child. But these are wise men, and they are not easily fooled. They recognize Herod as a paranoid king who is seeking to eliminate any potential rivals. So the wise men will take a different road back. They'll go back the long way for the sake of safety, their own and that of the baby king. And these wise men bring gifts. Gold, which is befitting royalty. Frankincense, which is a favorite of priests for religious services. And myrrh, which is used in burial rites. There are other uses for these things, and there were potentially other gifts that Matthew doesn't mention. There's a lot of things that Matthew doesn't mention here. But these hold much foreshadowing for the life to come. A king, a priest, sent to die. Matthew writes this already knowing the ending of the story. This is where the story will go. Well, the gifts are valuable and sustain the family through some hard times of movement to come. First, they had to go to Egypt to escape the wrath of Herod. And then, after a while, they came back to Nazareth. And moving is expensive, even more so then than it is now, especially when there's danger on the road and protection is needed and must be paid for a young family with a little baby. So how important were these gifts of the wise men? How long did they sustain the family and enable them to get the necessities of life? Food, clothing, shelter, protection. We don't know how much the wise men gave them, but however much it was, it probably seemed like a lot to a poor family from Palestine. A poor carpenter doesn't see a gold piece every day. For these young parents, it probably seemed like a fortune. It made an impression on generations of Christians, so much so that we now associate Christmas with giving gifts. And this is the part of Christmas that has worked its way through all of the culture, whether they're people are Christians or not, that of giving and receiving gifts at this time of year. And it started with some Gentiles bringing gifts for a Jewish baby who would become a king. Well, giving gifts has become something we do. We give gifts to our families, to our friends, to people that we know or admire, or people who have done something for us. It's a habit we have developed, and it's a good one. It shows appreciation for what others have done and our affection for those close to us. And it reminds us that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Well, part of the idea for this grows out of the culture of hospitality, which is very strong in the Middle East, where Jesus grew up and lived. You know, hospitality is a responsibility there. Someone traveling through the desert, coming upon a village, will often need a place to stay, and hotels were not common in that part of the world in that time. They may still not be very common now, haven't been. And it can be as ritualized as Christmas has become for some of us. And I've read stories of tribes in Africa who place so much emphasis on giving gifts that they would overdo it. That when a neighboring tribe would come to visit, some sort of official state visit, usually, it's almost like one country paying a foreign visit to another country. And it became traditional to give extravagant gifts to your visitors to show how wealthy and prosperous your tribe was. And this got so important to them that a tribe would impoverish themselves to give lavish gifts to their visitors. Well, that's a bad kind of gift giving so much in order to show off. That's not the true spirit of giving or receiving. Well, what motivated the wise men to give their gifts to Jesus? I mean, this wasn't their religion. Did they do this sort of thing on a regular basis? Well, that seems unlikely. I don't know how many stars you can see that you can follow and find a baby doing it. But to them it seemed like the right thing to do, to honor a king, perhaps to give homage to a new leader that had been prophesied. But what they found could not have been what they expected. A child of poor parents, the mother a teenager, the father a carpenter, a working man. But they gave their gifts anyway, and they were likely appreciated all the more because those who received were in such need. And I wonder how long those gifts provided the means for the family to get by just day to day. I'm sure that Joseph and Mary were grateful for these gifts, if nothing else, because of their need for them. You know, we always appreciate getting something we need. We're not always good at being grateful for things we don't need or that aren't what we expected. I picked up some lessons from a book I read a couple of years ago. The title is Grateful. The author is Diana Butler Bass. She says that being grateful is something that we need to practice. You know, people these days say to count your blessings, which is another way of saying it's important to be thankful or to be grateful. And studies show that grateful people live longer and healthier lives, which I guess means you spend less time worrying and complaining. Being grateful reminds us of how good we have it and how much worse things could be and probably have been at some point. I thank God for leading me to this time and place, because my life now is as good as it has ever been. I'm doing important work that I enjoy doing. And that's a good reason to be grateful. Well, one of the suggestions that Mrs. Bass made for learning how to be grateful, one of the suggestions Mrs. Bass made for learning how to be grateful, now that maybe you can hear me better, is to keep a logbook or a journal, writing down and keeping track of your blessings. Now, I've never been good at journaling, but if you can journal, or even if you just like to make lists, that might be a good practice, to keep up with counting your blessings. And think about, what is it you are grateful for? And can you come up with something every day? Because every day is different. Friendships and family and home and pets and little things that people do for you. You know, once we get going, we can usually think of a number of things. Well, I used to have trouble with thankfulness. Because if someone gave me a gift and it wasn't something that I wanted or needed, I didn't appreciate it. But since then, I have learned to be thankful that they were kind enough to give something rather than disappointed because I wanted something else. You know, gifts are their own sort of language, the language that says, I thought enough to think of you and to give you something because of that. Or maybe they didn't know you well enough to know what you wanted or needed, but they loved you enough to give something. That a gift is given has become more important to me than what the gift is. Well, mostly we give gifts because we have already received the gift we needed, a Savior. Perhaps those wise men, however many of them there were, knew that. They came looking for a king and found a poor family with a newborn. They left gifts, even though they did not find what they were looking for or what they expected, because they knew they were needed. The wise men trusted that the gifts were sufficient, even if they did not bring them for this purpose. And it marked a historical change in the way gifts were given and the reasons. Throughout most of history, gifts have been given to curry favor or to purchase loyalty. Yet gifts came with certain strings attached. A gift was given to gain an advantage, or perhaps a favorable opinion, or a gift was given by a king or a ruler with an expectation of loyalty to follow. It was cheap loyalty, purchased loyalty, but it was often sufficient for a purpose. It was what we call a quid pro quo. I've given you something, so out of gratitude, you will give me service or assistance or something else of value. The wise men may have brought their gifts for that purpose, but what they found was unexpected. They did not find a king who could grant them favors or patronage, but a baby of poor parents who could not aid them. And they gave the gifts anyway. This brought into the world new reasons for giving gifts. Giving gifts for reasons other than helping oneself. Gifts given out of a place in the heart that only Jesus can occupy. So, there are two main reasons to give gifts, two good reasons to give gifts. Out of love and to meet a need. We give gifts to people we give gifts to people who do not need them or who could get these things for themselves simply because we care for them and we want to give them something out of our abundance. And that's what most Christmas gifts are. The other gifts we give, which are mostly given not at Christmas time, are to meet a need. And people are always in need, and the poor are always among us. God has given us gifts so we may pass on these gifts to others in His name. And we sometimes act as though things are scarce, when in reality there is plenty for everyone. We as humans tend to be hoarders, to store up riches for ourselves. But that's not why God created us. We don't need bigger barns or higher walls. We need longer tables. We don't need to wait for people to come to us. We need to take our camels and go and find them, following the star which suddenly appears, taking our treasure chests with us. We should be like those wise men, prepared to give to meet a need, even if it wasn't the one we were prepared to meet. Needs don't come tailored to our tastes. Be ready to give with an open mind. if we are prepared to give, there will always be a